The sun was bright over the quiet neighborhood when a young worker named Daniel walked up the path with a package in his hands. He had been delivering boxes all morning, and this stop looked no different. A small brick house, an old wooden door, and a name written neatly on the label. He expected nothing unusual, but something inside him felt heavy as he stepped closer. He knocked gently and called out that a delivery had arrived. For a moment, there was no answer. He almost thought no one was home, but then the door opened slowly with a creak. An elderly woman stood there, her silver hair curled, her eyes tired but warm. She wore a plain white shirt, and at first, Daniel almost smiled until his gaze dropped lower. On her clothes, right across her waist, there was a dark red stain. It looked fresh, and it was impossible not to notice. Daniel froze, his grip tightening on the box. His training had never prepared him for this. He looked at her face again, but she seemed calm, almost too calm. As if nothing was wrong. "Ma'am, I have a package for you," he said carefully. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached forward. And Daniel noticed that her fingers were pale, almost weak. The stain was bigger than he thought. It didn't look like spilled food. It looked like blood. His heart beat faster, and he felt the strange weight of the moment pressing on his chest. He didn't know whether to ask directly, or pretend he hadn't noticed. People could be sensitive, and he didn't want to offend her. But his instincts whispered that something was wrong. Very wrong. She forced a small smile. "Thank you, young man." Daniel tried to keep his voice steady. "Are you all right, ma'am?" The woman didn't answer at once. Her lips pressed together, and her eyes darted toward the inside of the house for just a second. That small movement told him more than words could. Something inside that house was not safe. Daniel shifted the box to one arm and glanced past her shoulder. The hall behind her was dim. The curtains were drawn, and shadows stretched across the walls. He thought he saw movement deeper inside, but it was gone in an instant. The woman leaned slightly against the doorframe, as though standing was an effort. She whispered, "I shouldn't keep you waiting. You must have other deliveries." But Daniel didn't move. His gut told him to stay. He noticed a thin bruise around her wrist, hidden under the sleeve. It looked old, but it added to the uneasy picture forming in his mind. "Ma'am," he said softly, "if you need help, you can tell me." Her eyes flickered again, and for a heartbeat, he thought she was about to speak. Then her expression tightened, and she shook her head quickly. The motion was too sharp, too fearful. It wasn't denial, it was warning. Daniel's throat went dry. He wanted to ask more, but before he could, a heavy sound came from inside the house. It was the sound of something shifting. A chair scraped roughly across the floor. The woman flinched. Her body tensed, her eyes wide. She looked back into the darkness of the hallway, then back at him, silently pleading. Daniel's pulse hammered. He set the package gently at her feet and whispered, "Ma'am, please step outside." But she shook her head again. Her hand moved subtly, signaling him not to push further. That same hand brushed against the red stain on her shirt, as if to hide it, but the fabric clung too closely. The door moved slightly as though someone else was pushing from inside. The old woman's breath caught in her throat, and she quickly pressed it closed with surprising strength for her frail frame. Daniel now understood. She wasn't alone. Someone was in that house, someone she feared. Every instinct screamed at him to act, but his mind raced through options. If he called out, it might put her in danger. If he walked away, she might not survive whatever was happening behind those walls. The woman's eyes locked onto his. There was desperation in them, but also hope. She needed him to understand without words. Daniel slowly nodded. He forced a casual smile and stepped back. "All right, ma'am. You take care. Enjoy your package." His voice carried false cheer, but his eyes told her the truth. He wasn't leaving her to this fate. As he turned away, he pulled his phone from his pocket. His hands shook, but he dialed quickly, his voice low and urgent as he spoke to the operator. "There's an elderly woman at this address. I think she's in serious danger. Please send help. Right now." He didn't look back immediately. He couldn't risk giving away what he was doing. But as he walked toward his van, he caught one last glimpse of her through the half-closed door. She stood trembling, her face tight with fear, but her eyes glistened with silent gratitude. Daniel slid into his van, his heart still pounding. He had only delivered a package, but now he was in the middle of something far greater. He had no idea what waited inside that house, but he knew he couldn't turn away. For him, this wasn't just a delivery anymore. It was the beginning of an unexpected war he hadn't chosen, but one he could not ignore. Daniel sat in his van, his phone pressed tightly to his ear as he repeated the address to the emergency operator. His voice was calm, but his heart was racing faster than ever. The operator promised that a patrol car was already on its way. Still, every second felt too long. He couldn't shake the image of the elderly woman's trembling hands and the stains on her clothes. He leaned back in the seat, but his eyes never left the small brick house. The front door was now closed, the box still sitting on the doorstep like a silent witness. Daniel's gut twisted. He wanted to storm back in, but he knew it could make things worse. Whoever was inside had already shown signs of control. If they realized she had reached out for help, even in silence, it could end badly. Shadow moved across one of the covered windows. Daniel's fists clenched. He thought he saw a figure taller and broader than the old woman. The curtain shifted as if someone was watching the street. Daniel quickly lowered himself in the seat, pretending to be busy with paperwork, hoping not to draw attention. Minutes stretched painfully. He replayed the moment at the door again and again. The bruise on her wrist. The way she tried to warn him without words. The sound of furniture scraping inside. The red stain that could only mean injury. Every detail pointed to danger. Then his phone buzzed. It was the dispatcher checking back. "Officers are 3 minutes away. Stay where you are and do not approach the house." Daniel swallowed hard. 3 minutes. For the woman inside, 3 minutes could be forever. He turned his head when the door opened again. This time, it wasn't the old woman. A man stepped into the doorway. His figure was broad, his hair unkempt, and his eyes scanned the street like a predator checking for threats. He picked up the box, looked around once more, then shut the door with force. Daniel's blood ran cold. The man hadn't spoken, but his presence explained everything. Whoever he was, he had control inside that house, and the old woman was at his mercy. At that moment, Daniel knew this was no ordinary delivery gone wrong. It was a trap of silence and fear. He gripped his steering wheel, waiting, praying for the sound of sirens. Finally, faint but growing louder, he heard them. Red and blue lights appeared at the end of the street. Daniel's chest eased with relief. But the danger wasn't over yet. The patrol car rolled up slowly, careful not to spook whoever was inside. 2 officers stepped out, one heading to Daniel's van while the other approached the house. Daniel quickly explained what he had seen: the stains, the trembling woman, the unknown man. The officer nodded grimly and signaled to his partner. They approached the front door together, knocking firmly. "Police, open up." There was silence at first. Then footsteps, heavy and slow, moved closer. The door cracked open, and the same man stood there, his face stiff. He tried to smile, but it looked unnatural. "What's the problem, officers?" His voice was calm, but Daniel caught the tension in it. "Sir, we had a welfare call. We need to make sure everyone inside is all right," the officer said. The man chuckled dryly. "Everything's fine. Just me and my mother. She's resting." Daniel's eyes widened. Mother? That elderly woman was with him? His hands curled into fists. The officer pressed. "We'll need to speak with her directly." The man's jaw tightened. He opened the door a little wider, but not fully. "She's tired. I don't want you disturbing her." Before the officer could reply, a weak voice floated from inside. "I'm here." It was the old woman. Her words were shaky, but she forced them out. The man turned sharply toward her, his body blocking most of the doorway. That one reaction told the officers everything they needed. "Step aside." "Sir," one officer ordered firmly. The man hesitated. For a tense second, the air was thick with danger. Then, with a glare, he backed away just enough to let them inside. Daniel sat frozen in his van, watching. He knew this wasn't over. The officers had entered, but something told him the man wasn't going to let go of control so easily. Inside that dim house, a battle of silence, fear, and hidden truths was about to unfold. And Daniel, though only a delivery worker, had already become part of it. The two officers stepped cautiously into the house, their hands resting near their holsters. The air inside was heavy, the kind of silence that carried secrets. Daniel leaned forward in his van, his eyes glued to the doorway, wishing he could hear every word. The elderly woman stood near the hall, her body trembling, her white shirt marked with that dark stain. She tried to smile at the officers, but her eyes betrayed the truth. They darted nervously toward the man who lingered close, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. "Ma'am, we just want to make sure you're all right," one officer said gently. She nodded, but her lips quivered. "I'm fine." Daniel could see the lie in her eyes, even from where he sat outside. She was trying to protect herself, maybe even the man. But the bruise on her wrist and the red stain told a different story. The taller officer stepped further inside, scanning the living room. It was dim, the curtains drawn, furniture shoved slightly out of place. On the floor, a chair had been knocked over. His eyes narrowed. "Sir," he said to the man, "do you mind if we take a quick look around?" The man's face tightened. "Yes, I do mind." "You don't have a warrant." His voice was low but sharp, every word laced with anger. The second officer spoke firmly. "We had a call. Welfare checks allow us to confirm her safety. If everything is fine, you have nothing to hide." The man's hands curled into fists at his sides. He looked ready to explode, but then his mother, or perhaps his captive, touched his arm gently. "It's all right," she whispered. "Let them look." Her courage in that moment was small but powerful. Daniel could see it from the van. He clenched the steering wheel, silently cheering her on. The officers moved carefully through the living room. One of them spotted something by the couch, a cloth rag, stained the same dark red as the woman's shirt. He lifted it with a pen. His eyes met his partner's, the meaning clear. This wasn't spilled juice. "Ma'am," the officer asked, "are you hurt?" The woman hesitated. Her lips parted, then closed again. She glanced at the man, fear tightening her face. He glared at her, his expression a silent warning. Daniel's heart pounded. He could almost feel her struggle caught between the truth and the threat standing beside her. Finally, her shoulders slumped. She whispered, "Yes." The word was so faint it was nearly lost. But the officers heard it. That was enough. "Sir, step aside," the officer ordered. His voice hard now. The man's eyes burned with rage. "You don't understand. She belongs here. She needs me." His voice rose, shaking with something dangerous. The officers reached for their cuffs, but the man suddenly lunged. He shoved one officer back into the wall, sending a picture frame crashing to the floor. The old woman cried out, stumbling backward as the chaos erupted. Daniel's instincts overpowered his fear. He leapt from the van and sprinted toward the house. His mind screamed that he wasn't trained for this, but his heart refused to leave the woman alone. Inside, the officers wrestled with the man, but he was strong and wild. Furniture toppled, glass shattered. Daniel reached the door just in time to see the struggle. Without thinking, He grabbed the box he had delivered earlier, swinging it with all his strength. It struck the man across the back, breaking his hold long enough for the officers to pin him to the ground. Handcuffs clicked shut. The man roared with fury, but his fight was over. The elderly woman stood frozen, her hands clutching her stained shirt. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Daniel stepped toward her slowly, his voice gentle. "You're safe now, ma'am. They've got him." Her eyes filled with relief and pain. She whispered, "Thank you." The officers escorted the man out, his shouts echoing through the quiet street. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispers already spreading. Daniel helped the woman sit on the couch, careful to keep his voice soft. He noticed now that the stain wasn't just from blood, it was mixed with bruises, the marks of long suffering. "Do you need an ambulance?" he asked. She nodded faintly. "Please." One officer radioed for medical support, while the other offered her water. Daniel stayed by her side, his hand steady on hers. For the first time that day, she looked at him not with fear, but with gratitude. "If you hadn't noticed, if you hadn't called." Her voice broke. Daniel swallowed hard. He realized that what had started as a simple delivery had turned into something far greater. He wasn't just a worker anymore. He was the reason she had a chance to survive. And though the danger seemed over, he couldn't shake the feeling that more truths were still hidden in this house, waiting to be uncovered. The flashing red lights of an ambulance painted the street as paramedics rushed toward the small brick house. Daniel stepped aside to give them space, though his eyes never left the elderly woman. She looked fragile, her shoulders hunched, her shirt stained, yet there was a quiet strength in the way she tried to sit upright. One paramedic knelt beside her. "Ma'am, we're here to help. Can you tell us what happened?" Her lips trembled. She looked toward Daniel as if to draw courage, then whispered, "He wouldn't let me leave. I wanted to call for help, but..." She stopped, her throat tight with fear. Daniel's jaw clenched. He understood now she had been living under control, under watch, for longer than anyone realized. The paramedics gently lifted her shirt, just enough to examine the wound. A deep cut ran across her side, poorly bandaged with a dirty rag. The bleeding had slowed, but not stopped. One medic shook his head. "This needs stitches. We'll take her to the hospital right away." The officers nodded, still standing guard by the handcuffed man outside. He was in the back of the patrol car now, his face pressed against the window, fury burning in his eyes. He shouted muffled curses, but no one paid attention. Daniel knelt beside the woman. "You'll be okay now. They'll take care of you." She reached for his hand, gripping it weakly. "You noticed," she whispered. "Everyone else came and went, but you. You noticed." Her words hit him hard. He realized how many people might have seen signs before and ignored them. But for her, his small act of attention had been the difference between silence and rescue. As the paramedics carefully placed her on a stretcher, Daniel followed them to the door. He felt protective, unwilling to let her vanish into the chaos without knowing she would be safe. The medic gave him a reassuring nod. "We've got her." Outside, neighbors had gathered in small clusters. Some whispered, others stared. A few shook their heads as if they had always suspected something. Yet none of them had acted. The officers pulled Daniel aside. "You did the right thing calling us. If you hadn't, this could have ended much worse." Daniel nodded, though his chest was still heavy. His eyes went to the patrol car where the man sat, restrained but unbroken. The look in his eyes was more than anger, it was hatred, the kind that promised he wouldn't forget. The officer noticed and spoke firmly. "Don't worry. He won't be bothering her again." Daniel wanted to believe that, but something in his gut told him the story wasn't finished. The ambulance doors closed, and with a siren's wail, it sped down the street. Daniel stood there, the cool evening air brushing against his skin, but he felt no relief. He had stepped into something dark, something bigger than a single call to 911. One of the neighbors, a woman in her 40s, approached quietly. "You were the delivery boy, right?" she asked. Daniel nodded. The neighbor lowered her voice. "We've heard shouting from that house for years." But she never spoke up. "We thought maybe it wasn't our place." She looked guilty, her eyes lowering to the pavement. "I guess it was." Her words made Daniel's chest ache. It wasn't just one afternoon of suffering. It was years. The stains on the woman's clothes were only the latest mark of a hidden war she had been fighting silently. As the patrol car pulled away with the man inside, Daniel felt a strange emptiness. He had delivered packages hundreds of times, but this was the first time his delivery had turned into a rescue. The officer clapped his shoulder. "You saved her life today. Don't forget that." Daniel managed a small nod, though his mind was restless. He thought about the woman's eyes, about how she had looked at him with silent hope. He thought about the man's rage, locked in the back of that car. He thought about the shadows inside the house, the broken furniture, the years of silence. Walking back to his van, he felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. He told himself the police had it under control, that the hospital would care for her, that justice would be done. But deep inside, he knew the story wasn't over. The war might have just begun. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and faint bleach, but for Daniel, the air still felt heavy with worry. He had followed the ambulance, unable to drive away. Something deep inside told him he couldn't leave the old woman alone after everything she had endured. In the emergency ward, nurses moved quickly, wheeling her to a treatment room. Daniel waited outside, pacing the corridor, his hands shoved in his pockets. He could still hear her weak voice in his head. "You noticed." After what felt like hours, a doctor came out, his gloves still on. "She's stable," he said. "The cut was deep, but we stitched it. She has older bruises too, signs of long-term harm. She's resting now." Daniel nodded, relief mixing with anger. The idea that she had been suffering for months, maybe years, while no one helped made his chest burn. Police officer who had followed the ambulance stepped closer. "We'll need her statement when she wakes." "And yours too, son." Daniel agreed quickly. He didn't care about paperwork. He only wanted the truth to come out. Later that evening, he was allowed into her room. The old woman lay against white pillows, her frail hands folded on the blanket. Her eyes opened when she heard his footsteps. "You stayed," she whispered. Daniel sat in the chair beside her. "Of course. I had to make sure you were safe." Tears welled in her eyes. "Safe? I haven't felt that word in a long time." She hesitated, then began to speak, her voice soft but filled with years of weight. "He's my son. But he changed. After his father died, anger grew in him. He blamed me for everything. At first, it was shouting. Then it was control. Then..." She touched the bandaged wound at her side. "This..." Daniel's fists tightened in his lap. "You didn't deserve any of that." She shook her head weakly. "I stayed quiet. I thought if I stayed quiet, he would calm down. But silence only gave him power." Her voice cracked. "I was too afraid to reach for a phone. He always watched me." Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady. "You're not alone now. The police have him. He can't hurt you anymore." But her eyes darted away. "You don't understand. He has friends. People who think like him. Men who drink together, talk together. They'll say I betrayed him. They'll come." The weight of her words chilled Daniel. This wasn't just one violent man, it was a circle that allowed the violence to grow. Before he could respond, the door opened and the officer entered with a notebook. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to trouble you, but we need your statement. Everything you can share will help." The woman looked torn. Fear trembled across her face. Daniel placed his hand gently on hers. "Tell them, he urged softly. It's the only way. Her lips pressed together, but finally she nodded. Slowly, painfully, she told the officer about the shouting, the bruises, the years of control. About how her son cut her when she tried to resist. About how she had been silenced by fear and shame. The officer wrote carefully, his expression grim. This will go on record. You've done the brave thing tonight. When he left, Daniel stayed behind. The old woman turned to him again. I don't know why you cared, young man. You didn't have to stop. You could have just dropped the package and walked away. Daniel swallowed, his throat tight. Because I saw you. And once you see, you can't just pretend nothing's wrong. She squeezed his hand weakly, her eyes glistening. You gave me back my voice. For a moment, the room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines. But even in that silence, Daniel felt the storm outside. The woman was safe for now, but her words echoed in his mind. They'll come. As he stepped out of her room later that night, the hallway felt colder than before. He noticed two men in dark jackets loitering near the exit, their eyes sharp, their whispers low. Daniel's stomach dropped. He didn't know who they were, but he knew one thing: the fight wasn't over. Daniel froze when he spotted the two men near the hospital exit. Their jackets were dark, their eyes hard, their conversation hushed but sharp. One of them glanced at him, then quickly looked away. They didn't belong there, not at this hour. And Daniel's gut told him exactly who they were. Friends of the man now locked in a cell. He walked slowly past them, pretending not to notice, but his ears caught their words. She's talking. We can't let her. Daniel's chest tightened. The old woman wasn't safe. Not yet. He stepped into the parking lot and immediately called the officer he had spoken to earlier. Two men are here at the hospital. I think they're connected to him. They're planning something. The officer's voice sharpened. Stay where you are. We'll send a unit. But Daniel didn't stay. He turned back, retracing his steps toward the old woman's room. He couldn't leave her unprotected, not when danger was this close. Inside, she was resting, her eyes half closed. Daniel moved to the chair beside her bed and whispered, You're not alone. I'm here. Minutes later, footsteps echoed in the hall. Heavy, deliberate. The two men entered, their faces shadowed under the fluorescent lights. One smirked, the other's eyes burned cold. Visiting hours are over, Daniel said firmly, standing between them and the bed. The taller man sneered. Move aside. This is family business. Daniel didn't flinch. Her safety is my business now. The room filled with tension, thick and dangerous. The woman stirred, her eyes widening in fear when she saw them. Her hand reached weakly toward Daniel, clutching the blanket as if to draw courage. The men stepped closer, but before anything more could happen, voices shouted down the hall. Officers rushed in, guns drawn, commanding the men to freeze. In seconds, they were restrained, cursing and spitting as handcuffs snapped shut. The lead officer looked at Daniel. Good call. You might have saved her twice tonight. Relief washed over him, his legs weak as the adrenaline drained away. He turned to the woman. Her tears fell silently, but her face softened with something he hadn't seen before: peace. You're safe now, Daniel said gently. She whispered back, her voice fragile but clear. Because you cared enough to stop. The officers assured her she would be moved to a secure location. Witness protection, if needed. The hospital would guard her until then. For the first time, she truly had a shield between her and the world that had hurt her. As Daniel walked out of the hospital hours later, the first rays of dawn touched the horizon. He was exhausted, but his heart felt strangely light. He had started the day as just a delivery worker, carrying boxes from house to house. But one package had turned into something far greater. He had noticed what others ignored. He had listened to silence. He had acted when it mattered, and because of that, An old woman's war was finally over. Back in his van, Daniel placed his hands on the wheel, staring at the quiet street ahead. He realized something then, that being a hero wasn't about uniforms, badges, or titles. It was about moments. Small choices. The courage to act when someone else cannot. He started the engine, ready for another day, another delivery. But he knew he would never forget the lesson of this night. Sometimes the greatest battles are fought not on distant fields, but at the doorsteps of ordinary homes. And sometimes, the person who notices a single stain can change the course of a life forever.